Thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we meet today. In my case, it is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. For those of you who I haven't already met, my name is Megan Wright, and I'm one of the steering committee members of the Yoga Ecology Festival. Yoga Ecology is brought to you by Ananda Marga, a spiritual philosophy and practice whose origins go back more than 7,000 years to a highly esoteric school of yoga. Ananda Marga teaches NEOHUMANISM, a concept that all beings deserve to be well and happy. Yoga Ecology Festival was derived out of the knowledge cultivated by Ananda Marga while running 35 years of Ananda Mela. I also have the great pleasure today to introduce to you Dada, who is a monk of Ananda Marga for over 30 years and is the chief inspiration behind Yoga Ecology Festival. Born in the then apartheid South Africa, Dada had a very personal experience with the inequalities and injustice prevalent within our human society. Dada began searching for something deeper and more profound than his computer engineering profession, and after a lengthy search, he learnt of the practice of meditation and yoga. Dada soon quit his career and travelled to India, where he undertook his monastic training. He's worked all over the world, including India, Southeast Asia, Holland, Italy, England, and Ireland, before spending the past 20 years teaching yoga in Australia and the South Pacific. Currently, Dada also spends time every year working from the Ananda Marga office in Ottawa, Canada, as well. This is how we come to have some fantastic Canadians on our team for the Yoga Ecology Festival, and we're so excited to be with you today and to introduce you to Dada P.
Namaskar. Namaskar is a traditional yogic greeting, meaning I greet you with the divinity, the inclusiveness of my mind, and the love and the cordiality of my heart. I greet you, Namaskar. As this is our inaugural event and introduction to yoga ecology, we would like to get you sufficiently interested to engage with us at Yoga Ecology, both for personal development and social transformation. We will leave you with tools for personal development, and with respect to social transformation, we bring an empowering, positive perspective, optimism for the future. In this session, we will explore core yogic concepts applied to social transformation, contextualizing issues that we face within the framework of yoga philosophy and yoga practice. Now, revolution means all-round change, not just a change of leadership or government, but a fundamental shift in our social psychology, in our individual thinking and social psychology, and more importantly, giving us a way forward with hope. And this is what we at Yoga Ecology are about. So let's look at some of the issues we face, or challenges we face as a society: political, environmental, social justice, wealth disparity, healthcare, education, and there are many more. But we will just look at these to give you a perspective. In Hong Kong, the people of Hong Kong are protesting because they're facing a real threat to social justice, their rights. Look at the sea of people. And this is playing out in many countries around the world. Catalonia is another example. The people of France have been protesting for a while now, triggered by the high cost of living, exacerbating wealth disparity. One day alone, more than 1 million people took to the streets of Santiago, triggered by the rise in public transport fares. Very quickly, it included the rising cost of living, income inequality, and political corruption. In Lebanon, the people are fed up. You have political cronyism, corruption, inefficient public services, where 3 groups share political power and creating this cronyism. In Iraq, they started this protest in October 2019 to protest years and years of corruption, unemployment, inefficient public services. And that is the least of the problem in Iraq. Public safety, personal safety and security is a significant problem there. These young people are concerned about their future. And this, climate change, is a global problem. If this is not a travesty of human rights, I don't know what is. When people seek refuge in Australia, the Australian government puts them in Manus Island, and many languish there for years and years without any hope. Imagine if that were you behind that fence. It could easily be me or you. Is access to human rights at the roll of a dice? George Floyd died on 25th of May, another victim in a system that perpetuates endemic racism and systemic inequality. This is the day-to-day reality for a significant part of our people. These two concrete pipes is their house. How can that be right? So let's recap on what we saw. Our political systems are clearly failing us. Do our politicians serve our interest? In surveys, most people say no. Do our political systems serve us? Clearly no. Is this designed for all of us, all-round social development? No, rather it is creating greater and greater economic disparity, exacerbating social breakdown, a history of boom and bust, and the story of capitalism is based on unrestricted individual greed supported by a defective ideology. When you have 85 of the richest people having more wealth than 3.5 billion people, how can that be right? We are clearly experiencing environmental degradation, and our politicians are beating around the bush, obfuscating the real issue instead of addressing it. And when they do address it, it is like a tax on people. Why? Because they are following an outdated story and ideology. The disparity in wealth creates inequality in access to justice, law, and due process. And in many countries, the leaders are using the forces of the police and the military to suppress people's yearning for justice. However, the question is, in this situation, is defunding the police the solution? Education is a for-profit business. In the so-called developed countries, governments are increasingly putting the burden of the cost of education on young people. Young people are coming out with their debt before they start their working life. And that debt has steadily increased from the 1980s to now. In developing countries, young people seeking a good education are prime targets for countries like US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And I recently heard an education minister say, oh, this is a very lucrative business. Education, a lucrative business? Isn't it a basic human right? And in this ideology and story, when people become sick and are the most vulnerable, our system profits out of this. When people want healthcare, the system sells health insurance. People just want good health, a basic human right. It is clear we have a systemic problem. The old narrative, the old story has collapsed, but no new story is emerging. Some people think that after COVID, we will go back to business as usual. However, the internal contradictions in this system is rapidly manifesting themselves. At Yoga Ecology, we choose to empower ourselves by developing the new narrative, a vision of a humanity that is inclusive. Humanity has to adopt one or the other. The dawn of a bright new era is on one side, and the worn-out skeleton of the past is on the other. We choose the dawn of a bright new era by building a society that actually reflects the meaning of the word society, moving together. To address this, we need to understand the underlying assumptions. We as individuals live by story. You may or may not know this. The underlying ideas and assumptions that remain largely unconscious for most people generates the self-talk that goes on in our minds. Once we become aware of this, we can begin to change our story or parts of our story. It is the same in society. The assumptions generate the social psychology, which is the story, and the social psychology creates the social system in which we live. To see whether we are living an outdated story, let's look at some of these assumptions. We look at two assumptions, materialism and biological determinism. We'll preface this by saying that scientific development has brought us much progress, but we have still a lot more to learn. Now, with materialism, it says that matter is everything and there is nothing beyond. Now, if we look at the Big Bang Theory as the origin of the universe, science does not explain the origin of matter. Where is the origin of matter? And when we look at how finely tuned the universe is, it makes no sense that this is a random event, an event of chance. Now, I'll give you an example. I have a car out there in my front yard. And if I take that car and strip it down to every nut and bolt and put all those pieces into a dump truck and dump that thing in my front yard, I do that 1, 10, 100, an infinity of times, what's the chances that at one time, in dumping that, all those parts will self-assemble into a fully functional, operational vehicle? I think you will agree with me that the chances are absolutely zero whether we do it 1 time, 10 times, or an infinity of times. It's still zero. Well, that is the thinking of materialism as to the origin, the nature of reality, and the origin of the universe. So materialism is an assumption, not a scientific fact. So let's look at biological determinism. That says that, again, life is a statistical probability, a fluke, a random event. And all your intelligence emerges out of the neural functioning of your brain. Now, this view on life is very disempowering, because this view says that you're no different than a light bulb, that when the light bulb goes out, you just throw it into the bin or the recycling bin, and there's nothing more to life. No higher order intelligence, no higher order organism evolving through the body. Now, this gives rise, materialism and biological determinism gives rise to competitive capitalism. We see unbridled individualism and the psychology of scarcity. It separates us into small units of competition. It justifies greed and then fosters fear. We see the need for accumulation of wealth and resources. We saw earlier that the chapters of the story based on materialism, it's clearly creating disempowerment and social breakdown. So what's the yoga story? The story of yoga is based on two foundational concepts. Consciousness is our intrinsic nature, and out of that we extrapolate, or the story of NEOHUMANISM emerges. So consciousness is that all life, all matter emerges out of a non-material state called consciousness. And that is why we are a singular being. In yoga, when we say consciousness, we are not talking about the act of being aware, which is a state of mind. Yoga says that consciousness is your essential nature. Consciousness creates mind, mind creates our physical reality. Today, much academic and scientific research is being done on yoga and meditation, because yoga is expanding at a phenomenal rate due to the benefit people experience. However, scientists are trying to understand why yoga works. And the foundational concept of consciousness comes from 7,000 years of empirical research and practice by yogis. So if we want to use the concept of consciousness, we need to define it. Consciousness is a state of being beyond the physical and mental dimensions, which is the source of all existence. Consciousness is the ultimate common point for inanimate and animate existence. And if you look at thousands of years of empirical research by yogis and match it with neuroscience, quantum physics, you come up with one foundation: consciousness. As a being of consciousness, you are immortal. When you die, you may lose the body, but not your existence, because you are a being of unbounded consciousness having a human experience. Remember, I said that yoga has two foundational concepts. The first one was consciousness. Well, the second is NEOHUMANISM. When we are born and we become, maybe at 1 year old or 2 years old, we become self-aware. We create the sense of self. We develop the sense of self, protectiveness of self. NEOHUMANISM is the idea that we can expand the sense of I and my to include first all human beings. Then we go further and we include all animals in the sense of I and my. And then we go even further and we include all plants. Based on this, we can create an inclusive social order. And that is the greatest human story waiting to be told. NEOHUMANISM tells the story of caring for each other and sharing, because in consciousness we are all one. We are not against tyranny, we are for benevolence. We are not against hunger, but for food security for all. We are not against poverty, but for economic democracy, wealth generation and distribution for all. So this is the story of what we want, not what we don't want. And when we include everybody, no one gets left behind. Our latest study of evolutionary biology, neuroscience, anthropology, and even history tells us of cooperation. Human beings, weaker than larger animals, survive through cooperation. Cooperation facilitates love. Love means inclusivity. Inclusivity means society, and society brings us to cooperation. We are essentially cooperative beings. Let no one tell you otherwise. Let me give you a very personal example. The fact that you exist and you are listening to me now is a triumph of cooperation. Your body is a 37 trillion unit example of the value of cooperative existence. You're alive due to the cells cooperating with each other. And what happens when cooperation is lost? We have a name for it. It's called disease. Yes, disease. Now apply that to the social context and you begin to see a perspective. We have created a social system that creates and propagates disease. However, we can change this. In the beginning of my talk, we saw some of the issues that we face as a human society. You see that people were protesting the injustices of the system separately in France, in Chile, Hong Kong, Iraq, Lebanon, Australia, and I can go on. But the point is that people are fighting against the system in their own little corner. However, the agenda is common: a better life for all. Now, with these bits of information in mind, let us start writing our story for all beings. When life emerges out of a singular consciousness, let's reflect that in a social order. We co-create a universal bill of rights, a set of principles that applies across all countries, uniting all human beings and including animals and plants and the biosphere. So it is a set of inalienable written principle that explicitly guarantees the basic necessities of life to all, creates a progressively increasing purchasing power for all, and it creates real social cohesion and stability, a place for all. This is an expression of all our needs and aspiration. It shall unite us because it facilitates the highest aspiration of each and every one of us. It shall also be the basic requirement for any government wishing to establish governance over us. Let this be our co-creation. Let us begin. Over the coming events, we shall go into details and develop ideas in each of these areas. Many years ago, a wise person said, Dada, when you are dealing with change and bringing in revolutionary new ideas, know this breakdown. 30% will oppose you. 30% will like what you say but won't do anything about it. 30% will just flow with the wind. But that leaves us with 10%. This 10% will understand the idea and put their energy into establishing it. I hope that the 10% is among you today. We will be running a series of events and we invite you to participate so that we can harness our collective knowledge and wisdom. We envisage a software platform that allows you to network with similar-minded people around the world. It will also have a wiki facility to collectively edit the draft of such a universal bill of rights. Applying collective wisdom and yogic ideas, let's see what it looks like. We begin to synthesize a new social order based on consciousness. With this, we see the emergence of the crimson dawn of a new era for all beings. While we see the emergence of light, there will be challenges represented by the clouds above there. But I'm confident that the collective human spirit will prevail. Join us at Yoga Ecology, and I bid you Namaskar.
Yoga Ecology is a global movement based on the theory and practice of yoga, that all life emerges from a singular universal consciousness. Let's create a social system based on that idea. You can connect with us via our website www.yogaecology.org, on Facebook or Facebook Messenger by searching Yoga Ecology Festival, or you can email us at info@yogaecology.org. Join us in creating a better world for all living beings.